So my job today in this video is to talk about academic disciplines and how you can use those disciplines and the history of those disciplines for your 401 project. But my job is also to talk about disciplinarity, or what it means to think from a disciplinary perspective. Now, we all think from a disciplinary perspective in academia, even if that perspective is not made explicit. So if we're shaped by what we study, then we should probably know where those ways of studying came from. So I'm going to talk a bit about the history of these disciplines and how they developed over time, and then about the idea of disciplinarity itself, before then giving you probably four good tips on how to use your discipline to help you in your particular project, in your group project. So ancient Egyptian schools were called schools of wisdom, and they were renowned and beloved by the ancient Greeks. Western universities claim that Plato's Academy in Athens was the first school of higher education, but it itself was based off of other forms of schools. And the entrance exam to the academy was fairly straightforward. It was, do you know geometry? Yes, no, maybe. If you say yes, then you can, enter the academy. We'll be talking about the longest serving instructor at the academy, Aristotle, in a little bit. But for now, let's talk about some other interesting schools and how they came to shape the history of your discipline, or just disciplines in general. So the oldest operating university, the oldest continuously operating university in the world, is the University of Al-Qarawiyyin in Fez, Morocco, which was founded in 859 CE. And for ancient schools such as that one, a discipline is an area of study. Each area of study has an object of study, and much of the inquiry in that discipline is about that particular object. Aristotle, remember him? In talking about ethics, he implied that we should only expect as much exactness as our subject allows. In other words, the subject matter that we study determines how precise we can be. Ethics then is a squishier undertaking than, say, categorizing different types of trees. And Aristotle developed his own method of thinking and then applied that method to all the subjects he could think of. When a subject would not allow his method to get very specific, he would say so and move on. But at the end of the day, it was the subject matter that drove the way it was studied. Aristotle and the general practice of ancient Greek and Roman academies developed an initial definition of a discipline for us, even though they didn't call it that. A discipline was the use of a particular method of study to study a particular subject. After the fall of Rome, fragments of ancient knowledges were contained primarily within Christian monasteries and Islamic houses of wisdom. In fact, while the European Christian world had limited academic resources, the Islamic Empire had the largest libraries that were currently known. Trade routes allowed for Islamic translations and commentaries on the knowledges of ancient empires, and specifically the ancient Greek and Roman writers, to make their way to monasteries where education was transformed. Western universities arose in the medieval period because priests had to do all the things and occupy roles that demanded higher studies than were commonly available. In particular, skills in mathematics, politics, and economics were needed, and thus these were taught. Wealthy parishioners wanted their kids to get similar education, so the monasteries then transformed into universities. Now, the universities had a curriculum that consisted of two ancient groupings of subjects, the quadrivium and the trivium. The quadrivium consisted of music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy, while the trivium consisted of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Initially, these were called faculties because they were taught by different faculty members who understood themselves as the faculties or organs within a single body. these faculties eventually gave way to talking about themselves as teaching particular subjects, but not yet called disciplines. They were instead called the skills of free humans, or the liberal arts. Disciplinary designations arose from the German university system, which began in the 1800s, when there were designations made between the human sciences and the natural sciences. Under these new divisions, people could use a variety of methods to examine a variety of topics. With this distinction between the human sciences and the physical sciences, we get disciplinary definition number 2. For this German university system approach to education and to disciplines, being a part of a discipline meant using a variety of methods to examine a variety of topics within the larger tradition of inquiry known as a discipline. So for example, one could do the hermeneutics of theater or interpretation of theater. One could do a phenomenology of religious life or the logic of bats. And in all of that, you were still doing philosophy. So then, are disciplines just stuff done by people who say they are doing a thing? If I say that I'm a physicist because I describe motion by reasoning from first principles, am I a physicist? I've got a method, I've got a subject matter. Who's to say that I'm not a physicist? I am. I'm not a physicist. But you also can't just say you're a physicist and not actually practice in the ways that physicists practice. All of us are subject to fundamental laws of the universe and how physical bodies move in space. But physicists try to understand those things in a very particular set of ways, and a particular set of ways that has developed over time. Which is to say, physics is not just a subject matter, it is a way of engaging that subject matter that builds on a history of engaging that subject matter. So, maybe we need to think about disciplines in a different way. Maybe we need to talk about disciplinarity. Disciplinarity is expertise in a discipline, including the understanding of methodology and the capacity to obtain, analyze, and employ specialized knowledge. In other words, disciplinarity is using or acting out of a particular body of knowledge or method. It has to do with humans acting in certain ways because they're certain kinds of people. Philosopher Michel Foucault, in his work Discipline and Punish, talks about this as disciplinary power. Disciplinary power is a mechanism of power that regulates the thought and social behavior of social actors through subtle means by organizing space, time, and everyday activities. And what's most important to disciplining people is the act of observing them. Another way of saying this is to say that academic disciplines shape you to be certain kinds of people who will think and act in very particular ways. But how does this happen? And what does it look like to be a disciplined person? Foucault says in Discipline and Punish that disciplinary power aims at shaping docile bodies. A docile body is a body that is ready to accept control or instruction. It is a body that is prepared to do what it is told to do. Now, these bodies are targets of power and are subjected and transformed and improved through the constant form of coercion known as organizing time and organizing space. So pause and think about that. Your year in school determines where you're allowed to live. Your major determines what spaces you frequent. Your classes determine how you spend your time. You've been trained to be docile bodies all your life. Foucault is trying to make clear that discipline is neither good or bad. We benefit from discipline and from being disciplined. We want our scientists and our doctors to be disciplined. We don't want people saying, yeah, I was sick of being made into a particular kind of person, so I just skipped all my classes on how kidneys work, but still a doctor, I guess. That would be terrifying. Disciplinarity is simply acting out of the skills and ways of being and thinking we have become accustomed to through our studies. It is neither good or bad, it merely is. This isn't to say there aren't any consequences to being disciplined into particular kinds of people. When we treat our discipline as though it is the answer to all the world's problems, or that it's the only way to really know what the truth of everything is, we engage in what Caribbean and Africana philosopher Lewis Gordon calls disciplinary decadence. By disciplinary decadence, Gordon means the following. Disciplinary decadence is the phenomenon of turning away from living thought, which engages reality and recognizes its own limitations, to an absolutized conception of disciplinary life. The discipline becomes the world. And in that world, the main concern is the proper administering of its rules, regulations, or method. It is best seen as one discipline assessing all other disciplines from its supposedly complete standpoint. Reality, Gordon says, is not always obedient to consciousness. Any discipline or generative system for the organization of reality faces the problem of having to exceed the scope of its object of inquiry. There is, in other words, always more to and of reality. Disciplinary decadence is quite literally decadence, or falling out of rhythm with reality. When we think that everybody should just think like an engineer, or that people in non-STEM fields are just pretending to be academics or thinkers, we engage in disciplinary decadence. Every discipline has a history, and every discipline shapes us to be certain kinds of people who will think in certain kinds of ways. And perhaps most importantly, every discipline also has its limitations. Disciplines are a perspective on the world, examining a particular subject matter or field, but they are just that, a perspective. The problems that the world faces, catastrophic ecological upheaval due to global climate change, the continued dehumanization of Black, Indigenous, and other persons of color, along with those who identify as LGBTQ, economic systems that exploit their workers and deny them dignity in their labor. I could go on, but you get the point. All of these require more than just one discipline to address them, let alone to solve them. So how do you do it? What is the practical takeaway from this lovely chat? Well, I think that doing disciplinarity well means doing the following, and here is your list of things. Number one, understanding the history of your discipline and the development of it is really important. Even though your discipline might be concerned with a specific set of problems now, that doesn't mean it always has been concerned with those problems. There might be resources in the history of your discipline that can directly address the needs that your project has. Number two, understand and articulate the particular perspective or perspectives your discipline offers. You've been trained to think in certain ways. Lean into that. You have been taught to think using particular kinds of theories or methods, looking for particular kinds of patterns in data. This is not a limitation. This is a strength. You see things that others don't. Lean into it. Third, recognize the limitations of your discipline's way of doing things. Just as you see that there are things that others don't, your discipline has trained you to disregard other things that might be important. Other people see those things as important. No discipline has to do everything, and that's why they're different. Lean on the disciplinary variations and what other people see. Number four, and finally, avoid judging other disciplines. This way leads to the dark side. As St. Paul says in his first letter to the Corinthians, there is one Spirit but many gifts, one body but many parts. Each part is needed even if they aren't flashy. Judging other disciplines will only make you engage in disciplinary decadence. It doesn't accomplish anything. So don't pretend that your disciplinary friends in your group are less up to the task simply because they are org leadership or biology or health psychology. Every discipline contributes something crucial to helping you accomplish your project.